When we think about technology, we can think of the term broadly beyond computer technology, which might be the first thing that comes to mind. But there's many technologies that we use to do work. Paper can be thought of as a technology. Certainly, the printing press changed the world and how people interact in it. And we are seeing similar significant changes, even maybe larger in scope, with the internet. And so, of course, HR is using technologies, whether it's paper or whether it's the internet. It's central to what we do. A foundation function of human resource management is documentation of employment and maintaining all the operations necessary to employ people in a lawful and effective manner. Of course, when we think about computers and information technology, even before the internet, that was a big change of how we did business. It gave us more options to create documents and to manage information. And then with the advent of the internet, the ability to share and store that information, to gather it in scale, really expanded the amount of data and what we could do with that data. This disruptive change that we see due to computer technology and then the internet, now with mobile technology taking the internet, scaling out even further, it really is important to organizational strategy that we invest in technologies because they allow us to do the functions, whether it be recruiting or selection or performance management or compensation or training. All of these functions now are so linked to technology and our ability to manage human capital, to have a competitive advantage that we sustain through how we manage people. And with technology and being able to manage information, that is the new way of sustaining that competitive advantage. When we think about managing people through technology, though, keep in mind that we always have to try and keep an eye, a clear sight on the user experience. And much of the potential of technology comes through sharing that information broadly in ways that make us more competitive. And so we have to think about employee needs in terms of technology and how they're going to be utilizing it, because that's going to determine how it's implemented. And that's going to really determine whether those organizational needs that we should be focused on by understanding strategy are realized. But if we only focus on strategic goals and not in terms of how they're going to be implemented and how the employees experience this, we may be missing the mark. So there's a lot to think about when we think about HR, technology, and organizational strategy. Brings together and integrates the functions and connects to organizational strategy through these changes that are continuing as technologies change. When you look at the history of the use of the HRIS and its role in managing HR, the emphasis at the beginning was more about managing information. And of course, that's important that we can collect and store and edit and analyze and query and disseminate information. But that definition is really focused on management and not necessarily on employees using the technology in HR. And so things like self-serve functions and 360 processes and professional development portals weren't necessarily thought about early on when even when we were considering HRIS, and more that's part of the definition. So we see this evolving way of thinking about human resource information systems expanding into this realm of EHRM. And that EHRM is more about conducting HR operations through technologies like the computer and the internet, or an intranet within an organization. Because EHRM is focused more on the activities of all employees, including managers, it gives us an avenue to be more connected to organizational strategy. In this way, it's beneficial to HR because it's given us more of a voice, a way to contribute to realizing the strategic goals of the organization. There is a range of different activities and considerations for EHRM. We have to consider implementation, and whether we do that well will influence how well users adopt that EHRM, their satisfaction with the system, and ultimately their use of the system. Another consideration is the content, and I think this is often an area where we have to be careful because there are options, and there also are many times multiple needs that we have. And it can be tempting to try and solve all our problems in one fell swoop, but that is often a more difficult goal to achieve. And so there has to be really careful considerations of scope of content and what we are focusing on, and be careful that there isn't a creep and expansion that might undermine any progress being made. Design is so important because utilization is important. And so we have to be very intentional about how we facilitate the use of the technology. We need to consider that there are different users that will have different uses and have different needs. One recommendation I would have for that design aspect is to really try and develop your vision of the use of the technology. Begin with the end in mind. How do you envision people using this on their jobs? And in that way, you can then sometimes work backwards and think about that interface and design more clearly. We also must keep in mind and make assessments of the effects, because we may be accountable for justifying the budget expenditures that it takes to implement EHRM. And of course, as we're making ourselves relevant to strategy, we're also making ourselves more scrutinized because we're more relevant to the central goals of the organization. And so that, again, should be a good thing, and we want to build in our ability to assess the effects of the technology and to think about their effects at different levels. What are the effects on the user and on different departments and the organization as a whole, and other stakeholders, maybe external stakeholders to the organization? We might also think about effects from a qualitative perspective rather than a quantitative perspective. The computer technology often gives us or lends us to using more numeric data, but there is also the ability to capture more qualitative data that might tell us something different, something more about effectiveness rather than efficiency. The field of EHRM, one of the distinctions that it has is that it's expanded the target groups and how we interact with them in the organization. And it's allowed employees and managers to independently act and manage data through self-serve applications, and in some cases also interact with the data about human capital and the performance of work that can also be related to improvements in organizational functioning.